All right, we are live for another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. Joining me again, TFD Senior Performance Dietitian and recent resident of Phuket, Thailand. Is that where you are? Phuket?
Phuket.
Phuket, Thailand. Jack Doherty is back on. Tell the people what's going on. You're away holidaying yet again while we're all back home slaving away. What are you doing over there?
It's a bit of a holiday. I'm still working, but just training a lot, just doing a lot of Muay Thai here down in Phuket and Hawaii, and just visiting the guys at Bangtao.
I was saying when me and Ryan were on the potty last, is like everyone that's listening into these new episodes after this last 3 months is just going to think our entire job is just like we live like a Bali Fitfluencer life where we just like travel around to different countries and just work off our laptops. And it's like, it's absolutely not the case.
Yeah, this was just a random trip that I thought.
I guess for us, right, we do have a lot of business in Thailand. Like we work with a lot of big gyms over there, and Bangtao MMA just opened up under George Hickman, Frank Hickman, Andrew Wood, the Jew, all those guys just opened up a massive gym. So obviously we're going to be over in Thailand quite a bit. So we've got to have a bit of presence. So those listening, Jack isn't completely holidaying, sort of holidaying, but he is working over there. What I do want to talk about today, speaking of Thailand, speaking of things that's happening in Asia, One Championship had its massive event this weekend. It was the debut event on Amazon Prime, which is pretty huge. Like I think that's pretty huge for cracking into the American market as well. But you guys have heard me talk about this before. One Championship, hydration testing. I'm no stranger to what I think about it, but this is what me and Jack are going to discuss because Jack, you had a fighter on there. I think let's go over what the new One Championship hydration testing is, because not even too recently, they only just changed this. It used to be they introduced the hydration test, and what you had to do was for 2 days in a row, you had to pee in a cup, you had to pass a certain score on a urine specific gravity test, and then you also had to make your contracted fight weight, and that's how you made weight. And now, Jack, explain it now that they've changed it again, what you guys had to do for this recent event.
So after post-COVID, they've changed it. Instead of the two weigh-ins and the two hydration tests, it's the one weigh-in and one hydration test at midnight on Thursday night instead of the Friday. And then instead of the second one or second load testing, you can only be 5% above your contracted fight weight after your fight.
Yeah, so, I mean, like I straight off the bat, right? Like there's so many points just there that we want to talk about. I think the first point I think it's important making here is that it's good that One Championship are taking some initiative. Like the fact that they've sat down and they've gone, you know what, like we had this athlete that passed away. We need to do something about this. That's a good thing. Like that's nothing but a good thing that people are getting around and they're talking about it and they're saying, we need to improve this. The execution of how they improve this, I've said this time and time again, I think hydration testing is quite possibly one of the dumbest and least effective thing. And if anything, it puts these athletes at high risk, and we'll explain why, but it just makes this whole process way more complicated than what it should be. And even I'm reading this article now, I've got it up on the computer for MMA Mania, and the headline for it is 9 fighters fail hydration test or miss weight for One Championship's Amazon Prime debut event. Like 9 athletes missing weight. That's just insane.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, because obviously we had a fighter on there, Deandra, who made weight successfully. She passed the hydration test. She won her fight, and afterwards was below that 5%. So every barrier that they had in place, that she passed with flying colours, and she did quite well. But then we've throughout this fight camp we discussed those kind of things, and I think that the biggest anxiety that really happens is that 5% post fight, because what we spoke about just before was that if you go in there, you knock the person out in the first 30 seconds, you're not going to have much of a sweat going on. Or if you have a 3 or 5 round fight where you've been sweating the whole time, like that 5% can, how much water weight you lose through sweat can vary. So it's kind of that constant thing throughout camp, where we're discussing that how low we actually need to get the body weight, make sure the cut's minimal and stuff like that. The way that we did it, lucky Deandra trains incredibly hard. Her body composition was in fantastic position. So going into the fight week, we were way below the 5% anyway. So we didn't actually have to do anything dramatic. But you could imagine that the people who probably don't have the professional help or doing it themselves, they could be doing some dicey things to not only make weight initially, but then to make sure that they're below that 5% after the fight as well.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. We have a number of athletes that compete in one, and contractually in their contract, they put in there that you're not allowed to put on rubber sweats. You're not allowed to be going into the heat. Like in your contract, you're not allowed to be cutting weight. But the thing is, we take that really seriously, right? Like with all of our athletes, we don't cut weight when we go into one championship. That's the rules. They've said they don't want to do weight cutting. We take it seriously. They have this 5% post weigh-in. So like our guys have to have a body composition and a body weight where we can accommodate that. And sure, you can still manipulate some weight acutely. You can use those low risk strategies. You can reduce fiber. You can obviously reduce body weight during the fight camp to come down lower, but fight week, you can still reduce fiber. You can reduce carbs slightly and even remove them and re-add them back in. And, you can do a little bit of a water reduction in that last 12 hours or so, like nothing too crazy, but really you're only ever moving maximum 5% because like Jack said, you've got to re-weigh in afterwards. The thing is with one championship where it's very different to the UFC, which I take a lot of problems with, is every UFC event is governed by a commission of the state that you're in. So you've got the Nevada State Athletic Commission, or if you go to Arizona, you've got the Arizona State Athletic Commission. One championship does all of this in-house. And every single athlete that I've had in one championship where we followed the rules, we didn't cut weight, they've all gone up a weight class, they've done this. I'd say 90% of the fights that those guys have had, they've all said to me, that guy was massive. He was at least 1 to 2 weight classes above me. He definitely cut weight and then put way more weight back on. And I think that's what you're seeing here, right? Like you're seeing all of these guys. And if you guys look at this article on MMA Mania, it even highlights which athletes miss weight, missed hydration, or both. And a lot of them all missed hydration. And why are they missing hydration is because they're in a rubber suit, because they're in a sauna, because they're all cutting weight to get down to this weight, because they're so big, and that this has done nothing to stop this problem at all. All it's done is made these athletes try to come up with ways to cut weight, to sweat it out, but then somehow cheat this hydration test.
Yeah, this is a conversation we have all the time, because even last time we were in Perth, the Perth Commission had a conversation with us about like techniques that they thought to ask our opinion on. And again, I think that these strategies and like looking for ways to prevent, horrendous weight cuts, prevent deaths that happen through these practices is incredibly important. But again, the nature of this sport is that people will find ways to get around these certain things and stuff like that. And some of these stuff that people are implementing, even though the thought of it is a positive thought, sometimes it's actually putting them more at risk because they've got so many different things to contemplate, and even though they shouldn't try to bypass these rules, they actually are still trying to do it. So that's a bit concerning, because I think one of the guys didn't rock up to the weigh-ins or the hydration tests. I think the last one championship card, I don't know the details of it, but I think like Jonathan Haggerty ended up in a hospital. Whether that was to do with weight cutting or not, I'm not exactly sure. But they've had their last card was one of their biggest athletes. He ended up quite unwell. Not sure exactly the reason why, but again, that's two kind of cards where they have probably one of the strictest hydration testing / weight cutting rules in the combat sport world, and they're still seeing some incredibly bad results from these guys. Exactly 9 people missing weight. You don't really hear that happening in other organizations.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's because you add that extra barrier of trying to pass a hydration test. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that weight cutting isn't something that it is. Like weight cutting can be extremely dangerous. Like if you are not under the supervision of a professional, even when you're dieting, that can give you short and long-term health consequences if you go in too great a calorie deficit. When we talk about acutely manipulating your weight, if you don't know how to do that properly, it's very dangerous. But when we talk about the actual rapid weight loss or weight cutting part, where these guys are sweating in saunas, running in rubber suits or sitting in hot bath, that can be super dangerous, right? And if you've listened to the Fight Science podcast, you've heard me and Dr. Oliver Barley go back and forth about this and talk about the science of hydration. Essentially, why this is problematic is because I'd say 99% of people do not understand what hydration is. If you get a room of 10 scientists and you ask them what hydration is, you'll probably get 10 different answers and 9 of them will be wrong, because not a lot of people understand what hydration is. And then the most common thing is what we all think about when we think about hydration is the color of our urine. And the color of our urine is only representing how hydrated the fluid in our bladder is. And there's all different fluid components, compartments in our body. We've got fluid inside our cells, outside our cells, inside our blood, in our brain. We've got it in our spine. There's fluid in all different compartments. And where that fluid is determines its function. And when we talk about sweating and weight cutting, where this gets really dangerous is when we start ripping and moving fluid out from different compartments, say inside our cell, inside our brain, out of our spinal fluid, when we're doing these more extreme weight cuts, because that's giving us a real change in our electrolyte balance, and it's depleting areas of our body that probably take way longer than 24 to 36 hours to rehydrate. So extreme weight cutting is a really, really big problem. But that's why we don't do it, right? Like with none of our athletes, yes, weight cutting can be very problematic, but it can be done very safely. Like you can safely move 5% of your body weight in sweat if you know how to do it and you don't touch those deeper compartments where you're getting in this real dangerous zone. One championship just adds this extra hurdle with the hydration where these guys are still doing these extreme weight cuttings. So they're changing the amount of fluid in these deeper compartments in their body. They're probably ripping out fluid from inside their cells, ripping out that fluid around their brain, ripping it from their spinal fluid. What they're doing then is changing the osmotic gradient or the balance of electrolytes in our body. And then what do? They go, shit, I have to pass this hydration test. So then what they do is they just chug back a bunch of water, which is the absolute worst thing that you can do. If anyone has ever heard of the term hyponatremia or seen marathon runners, you know, if you're a marathon runner and you run in the heat, the worst thing you can do if you're sweating a lot is chug back plain water, because you can dilute your cells and you can cause your brain cells to swell, and you can put yourself in a coma, a seizure, or even die. So these guys are putting themselves this extra additional layer of risk purely to try in an attempt to pass this hydration test. And this is what you're seeing when you're seeing these events where 9 people are missing this hydration. They've all cut weight. They've all ripped out fluid from all these different components. They've completely dehydrated their bladder for one. And then what they're doing is they're going, oh crap, I need to somehow figure out how to do this. So they go, I'll just drink water. That'll rehydrate me. Not knowing how fluid compartment works or how the fluid moves through your body, how your body prioritizes shifting this fluid or how it even does that. And so they're coming in depleted as they may be on weight. They might have just sculled a bunch of water to like get up and even stay under weight, but they're still dehydrated as. And 9 fighters doing that, that to me says that this is a huge problem and they're all still cutting weight.
Yeah. And then the added factor of that is that the 5% allowance of their weight after the fight, if some people are undertaking like large weight cuts and, you know, depleting themselves, and then they're trying to rehydrate, and they're still worried about that 5% because potentially the fight might be over quickly, and they might, you know, be fined or lose the fight because of that 5%. So maybe again, will some people restrict their intake of fluids? Will they restrict themselves? Will they not rehydrate themselves? Exactly what you're saying. You're not giving your body and the fluid around your brain, giving those fluids back to your body. So are they still restricting themselves for that extra 36 hours until their fight, just to make sure that their weight's on point, and then really detrimentally and potentially putting themselves at risk of injury because they're in a dehydrated state? So you're putting that added pressure. Okay, sweet, you passed this test, but again, we're still going to worry about this part 36 hours later. How much weight, how much electrolytes can I put in? How much food can I put in? You're making that added stress, and you know there's going to be people who will restrict probably fluids or some other thing in that preparation to make sure they're not over that 5%, and again putting themselves at health risk in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and such a good point. Like the IBF in boxing do this as well, where they have a rehydration clause where the next day they'll come back and weigh you. Every single time though, every athlete I've ever had in that, because naturally you can move for elite level professionals. I'll say amateurs and even lower level professionals probably shouldn't be aiming to do 10%. It's quite stressful on your body. But if you're a top elite level person, then it's almost riskier. And we can have a whole convo about that. If you're not doing it and you're coming in way smaller than your opponent, you need to put that weight back on. Like Jack's saying, you need to rehydrate, you need to eat. If you've depleted your glycogen, you're going to put on a lot of weight when you put that glycogen by way of carbohydrates in the next evening and the next day of eating. If you've cut fluid during that weight cut and you put that back in, you're obviously going to put on weight. And this is where that second weigh-in becomes so problematic, because all of a sudden you've got athletes that have probably dieted for 8 weeks over excessively. So they've been in a crazy calorie deficit for these 8 weeks. They've gone way too depletive in this fight week to try and get this weight down. They've freaked out and they've still cut a lot of weight in a sauna, running us up like in a sauna suit. They've sat in a bath. They've done whatever. They've still done all this weight cutting. And then in the last 24, 36 hours, whatever it is, when they're attempting to put all this back in their body to attempt to compete at somewhat of a decent state, then you're saying, no, you have to kind of cap that. You have to cap that at 5%. And that's a huge risk in itself, because then you're just sending in this extremely depleted athlete. At least when we go to the UFC and we have our athletes that complete a good fight camp diet, a good fight week, even if they move 10% in that fight week, which again is a lot of weight, and I would not recommend that unless you're a top level professional, you aim to do that, and then they've dieted down during fight camp, at least then, if we haven't cut weight in that last little bit and sweat out excessively, I know I'm sending that athlete in as healthy as possible. I know I'm sending him back in where he's got the glycogen back in his muscle, he's put fluid back in his body, and he's, more importantly, they don't have fluid depletion around their brain, around their spine, around their organs, around areas that are going to put them at way higher risk of severe injuries if anything goes bad in that fight. I can rest easy knowing that athlete is in a much better spot. When we have this 5% re-weighing clause, that's absolutely not the case.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, this causes so much more anxiety for these guys, and it causes, and again, and more about food obsession, the safety. Like you're implementing things, or organizations are implementing things because in the name of safety, but in the reality of this world and the culture that is very instilled in combat sports, is that you're actually placing them at more of a risk, in my opinion, with some of these techniques. Like maybe the initial hydration test, maybe that's a great option for one, because I've seen it work before. But the 5% rule doesn't really make sense as well. So you're putting this pressure on these guys. You're making them, in theory, it's fantastic, but again, what are we doing? Are we doing these things just to make people seem happy, or just to do things? Are we actually putting things in place to keep these athletes safe, or just to make it look like you've done some certain things to make them look safe? You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, we're seeing these guys, in the weeks leading up to it, in fight week, the stress they go through, what they're doing, all this kind of stuff, doing the correct things. Like Deanna does everything absolutely correctly. But again, you're placing this thing when we know it can be done safely, if it's done properly with the guidance of a professional. Obviously, some people don't have the guidance of professionals. But again, if with this kind of stuff, for me, especially seeing what's happened on the weekend, the last one championship card with like that Jonathan Haggerty, something happened to him again. I don't know the information exactly, but it seems to be happening. So there needs to be, I know we've talked about this before, there needs to be a change of culture. But at the moment, the testing, that's what's going on, this kind of these weight cutting tests, but the one championship doesn't seem to be optimal, in my opinion.
No, it seems so far from optimal. And I think it kind of gets on my gears a little bit when we talk about this and you hear people in the public, or the public opinion of this, because if you talk to people in the public, they seem to think that one have it all figured out and that this hydration testing is the solution, and they rag out other promotions like Bellator or PFL or UFC that aren't doing this. Like even in this article here, it has a quote: per one's official website, one leads the global martial arts industry by banning weight cutting via dehydration. If there's anyone out there that believes that, you're the biggest casual I've ever met in this sport. One championship are doing absolutely nothing to help the weight cutting problem. And if anything, they're making it way worse. Way worse.
People just find it. You got to find a way around it. There's a way around everything. We see that in every sport. There's numerous things are banned. People still do all these, do a plethora of things because you can find a way around it. And that's the thing. Like, again, I think that some of these rules and regulations are just for an appearance thing, rather than for the actual health and safety of the athletes.
Yeah. And we talk about what's the solution then? What do we do to fix this? You and I have said this many, many times, and I don't care how many nerds there are with their pencils and they sit in their labs or they write these rules and they push these pens. Unless you're on the ground and you see this, and you're actually seeing what these athletes are saying to each other, how they're going about making weight, you do not understand how vitally important culture change is for this. Because like Jack said, no matter what rules you put in, these guys are going to bend it. These guys, you have to keep in mind, are blood sport athletes. They're combat sport athletes. They're going into another cage where they're shoving their elbow into other people's face. They're wrapping their shin to the side of other people's heads to inflict as much damage as possible. That's not a normal thing to do. Like, these guys obviously are very high risk taking individuals. If you think that they're not going to translate that attitude towards weight cutting, you're absolutely kidding yourself. And this is where culture change is so important. And like I said, we've seen it in our team. We've seen it with the gyms that we are affiliated with and we work very closely. It's almost now, if we have guys that are cutting too much, you're almost mocked. You're almost mocked because we've created this culture where weight cutting is not cool. Like, it's not cool. And we've proven with our top level athletes, you don't have to cut a lot of weight to do well. I think the other thing that we've seen that works pretty well, and you can argue this if you want, but the UFC and the UFC Performance Institute. Now, I'm not going to say that it's an absolute perfect model, but I will give credit where credit is due, with Charles Stull and those guys at the UFC PI who have gone to every single fight week, and the UFC who have invested money in professionals to get close with these athletes and then work with them year round to make sure that they are constantly in contact with them and have a good idea of where their weight is. That type of system works far better than what one championship is trying to do. I'm not saying that UFC system is perfect, but I cannot recall a card where the UFC have had 9 athletes miss weight. When have the UFC ever had that many athletes not meet the weigh-in protocols? Never. Every now and then you might get an athlete that maybe it's a last minute or something goes wrong and there's a pretty bad weight cut every now and then. But largely the implementation of the UFC PI and that system where they have access to professionals, and even another step where they're working on changing that culture amidst the community of UFC fighters, it's getting far, far, far better results than what one championship is getting with this hydration system.
Yeah, because you're putting in rules that not everyone understands. And some people, especially the Muay Thai community, some of these guys, like Rod Tang is from Thailand, and like they don't really have their gyms that they fight and they've been trained their whole life. They don't know the detailed science of hydration testing. Like, instead of putting just rules and regulations, like what the UFC does, create support systems, create these things in which people can rely on, give them access to like dietitians or give them access to exercise scientists to help them with this, to help them understand it. Because the rules to a lot of people is just rules, not explaining how to do it safely, how to lose weight safely, what is your actual weight class, all the stuff that we talk about in our assessment process and how we advise people. Are they doing that, or are they just putting rules and being like, we're the #1 organization with the most amount of hydration rules, instead of actually giving them, because like what we speak about also, outside the fact of the hydration testing, what are they doing the weeks leading up to it? If they're still missing, are they starving themselves in the week leading up? Are they already depleted like 4, 6, 8 weeks out? Like, what are they actually doing? Are you worried about their overall health, or a moment in time just so you can look good to social media? That's what I'm saying. Like, I think that's what they're missing big time here, is supporting these athletes in the weeks and in the full year. So when it comes to these things, they wouldn't have to worry about the hydration testing per se, because they've given the support that these athletes need.
Yeah, and I think one last point I do want to make, and I'm going to say it because I've had athletes go through this. Like I said, UFC, Bellator, PFL, they're all under state athletic commissions, close watch, right? Like, so everything when it comes to the weigh-ins is done by the athletic commissions. Everything is done in-house by one. Rod Tang didn't even rock up to weigh-ins. He didn't even go on stage for weigh-ins. Like, they cut the broadcast for the Amazon Prime weigh-ins. They just cut it because so many people were missing the hydration. The amount of backdoor deals that go on. I've had athletes that go in here and they just take the hydration test themselves, and then they'll go into another room with their coach and come back with a hydration sample that passes. And they don't even piss in it. They just give it to their coach. Like, all of these bad things go on behind the scenes. And like exactly like Jack's saying, it's just a public image, like a tick and flick. Oh yeah, we're doing something, but it's really not doing anything productive. And what it's really doing in essence is just making this issue so much worse.
Yeah, 100% agree.
I think let's just wrap it up there. I think we've gone over this many, many times. If you want to hear more about the science of why I dislike hydration testing when it comes to weight cutting so much, go back to the Fight Science podcast. There's 2 episodes I've done with Dr. Oliver Barley. We go over it in huge depth. We talk about fluid compartment theory. We talk about urine specific gravity and the different types of tests you can do to measure hydration and why none of them right now stack up in the context of cutting weight. And whoever made this decision to bring in USG hydration testing in one just has no idea what they're talking about. Go back and listen to that. I think let's end that here. Final notes is, again, I don't want people to think that hydration testing is the solution. It's absolutely not. Again, good on you, good on you for having this conversation, making an effort. Like Jack said, it's really just a tick and flick for the public image at this stage.
100%.